At my grandson's first birthday party, I gave my son an envelope I'd been saving for 33 years. My daughter-in-law took one look inside, laughed, and dropped it into the catering trash with the frosting-smeared plates. "Old papers and a key," she said. "Did you wrap up your junk drawer?" Her mother smiled into her wine. My son said nothing. I walked to the trash can, lifted the envelope out, wiped the buttercream off with my thumb, and left without a word. Monday morning, I carried that envelope into First Meridian Bank. The young man behind the counter looked at my account book, looked at his screen, and stopped breathing for a second. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "please don't go anywhere. I need to get the branch manager." Quick question before we go on. Have you ever been written off because of the uniform you wear instead of the person you are? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if stories like this one find a home in you, hit subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from. Fair warning, some details have been changed and shaped for storytelling, but the lesson at the center of it is as real as anything I know. Now, back to that bank. But first you need to see the party. The Wexford Inn sat on 6 green acres outside Dayton, all white columns and clipped boxwood, the kind of place that charged $400 just to let you look at their gardens while you ate. My daughter-in-law had booked the garden terrace for the baby's first birthday, a first birthday. There was a harpist. There was a man whose entire job was carving prosciutto off a leg the size of my arm. There were 110 guests, most of whom I'd never met, drinking sparkling rosé under a tent that cost more than my first car. I came straight from my shift. I'd asked for the afternoon off weeks ahead, but the Saturday cook called in sick and somebody had to get 400 lunch trays up to the patient floors at St. Ambrose. So I did the trays first. I changed out of my whites in the staff bathroom, put on my good navy dress, the one with the little pearl buttons, and drove out to the inn with the envelope in my purse. I'd had that envelope ready for a month. Heavy cream paper, soft at the corners because I kept taking it out and holding it. Inside was a brass key, a deed, and a little cloth-bound ledger. The deed was for the house on Cobb Avenue, the 2-bedroom with the crooked porch where I raised my son alone after his father walked out in 1990. I paid it off in 2003. I'd been quietly fixing it up for 2 years. New roof, new furnace, refinished floors, the kitchen redone with my own hands on weekends. It appraised at $380,000, free and clear. A young family's whole head start sitting in an envelope. The ledger was something else. Every month since March of 1991, I had put money into an account with my son's name on it as beneficiary. Some months it was $40. Some months, later on, it was a great deal more. I wrote every deposit down in that little book in blue ink, 33 years of entries, because I wanted him to someday read it like a diary. Not a number. A record of every Tuesday I worked a double. Every Christmas bonus. Every birthday where I told him I didn't need anything. I found my son near the dessert table, and for 1 minute it was just us, and he hugged me and smelled like the baby, like milk and sunscreen, and I almost cried right there. I handed him the envelope. "This is for you 3, I said. "It's everything I ever wanted to give you." He smiled at me, the real smile, the one he's had since he was 6, and started to open it. And that's when my daughter-in-law materialized at his elbow, the way she always did when I had his attention, with her mother 2 steps behind her like a shadow in Chanel. "What's this?" She plucked it out of his hands. Not rudely exactly. The way you take something from a child. She slid out the deed, glanced at the address, and her face did this thing. This little curdle. Cobb Avenue? She said the street name like it tasted bad. Then she laughed, light and pretty, pitched to Carrie. "Old papers and a key. Did you wrap up your junk drawer?" "It's the house," I said. "It's paid for. It's—" Oh my God, that's so sweet. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to the half circle of guests who drifted over. "But sweetie, we're not going to live on Cobb Avenue." A few people chuckled. Her mother leaned toward the woman next to her, not quietly enough, and said, "She does food service at the hospital. What did you expect? Stock certificates." More laughter, the polite kind, behind glasses of rosé, which is the kind that cuts deepest. I looked at my son, 31 years old, my whole life's work in a Navy suit. He looked at the grass, he laughed, one small, miserable, get-along laugh and said, "Mom, thank you, it's really thoughtful." And my daughter-in-law, still performing, dropped the envelope on the catering cart with the dirty plates where it slid into the open trash bag underneath. "We'll deal with it later," she said, and turned back to her party. Nobody stopped me when I walked to that cart. Nobody offered to help when I reached into the bag, past the smeared cake plates, and lifted out the envelope with frosting on its corner. The harpist kept playing. A man in salmon shorts watched me wipe buttercream off the deed to my house with a cocktail napkin, and then he looked away, embarrassed for me. I wasn't embarrassed. I was done. I kissed my grandson on his fat little cheek. He grabbed my finger. He didn't care what his grandmother did for a living, and I walked out across that perfect lawn in my good Navy dress, and I did not look back. They thought that was the end of something. It was the beginning. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the envelope drying on a dish towel and let my apartment be quiet around me. I've lived in the same one-bedroom over the bakery on 6th Street for 19 years. The radiator knocks. The smell of bread comes up through the floor at 4 in the morning. People assume I live there because it's all I can afford. I didn't cry. I gave up crying on the clock decades ago, back when I had a baby and 2 jobs and no margin for it, and the habit never left me. Instead, I got the step stool, took down the old soup pots from above the cabinets, and opened the fire safe I keep behind them. Here is what my son's wife did not know, because nobody knows, because I built it that way. In 1992, I was a 29-year-old divorced cafeteria cook making $8 an hour, and I heard 2 hospital administrators in the cafeteria line, "People never see the woman behind the steam table. They talk like you're a piece of equipment," complaining about a foreclosed duplex on Cobb Avenue nobody would touch, $41,000. I had $6,000 saved in a library card. I learned plumbing from books. I learned drywall from a retired contractor at my church who charged me in pie. I rented the other unit to a nurse's aide with 2 kids, and her rent paid my mortgage, and 4 years later, the bank let me borrow against it for the next one. 32 years. 1 property became 3, became 9, became what's in that safe now, deeds to 31 rental properties across 3 counties, held through an LLC with my initials buried in the paperwork. Mostly small places, duplexes, fourplexes, a few storefronts with apartments above. I rent to LPNs and line cooks and school custodians, and I have never once raised a rent on a tenant in good standing more than the year's costs. Total portfolio, the last time my accountant ran it, a little over $27 million. And one more thing, one folder near the bottom, a purchase agreement from 2018 for a failing historic property out past the county line that everyone said was a money pit. 6 acres, white columns, the Wexford Inn. I bought it for $3.1 million in cash through the LLC when the previous owners went under, hired a manager named Gus Ferraro who knew the events business cold, and within 3 years it was booked every weekend, April through November. I never set foot in it as the owner. I'd stood on its terrace exactly once before that birthday party, the day I signed the papers, alone in my work shoes. My daughter-in-law had chosen it because it was the most prestigious venue in the region. She had thrown my gift in the trash on a terrace I owned, under a tent I owned, while her mother called me the help on grass that I owned, every blade of it. People ask, and I'll be honest with you, because you'd ask too, why I kept working. Why the apartment over the bakery? Why the 5 a.m. shifts at 62 years old? Part of it is simple. I'm good at it, and 400 sick people a day eat better because I run that kitchen like it matters. Part of it is that nobody guards their tongue around a lunch lady, and I have learned more about money standing behind a steam table than most people learn at business school. And part of it, the part I got wrong, and I'll come back to that, is that I wanted my son to grow up watching work, not wealth. I thought if the money stayed invisible, he'd learn that a person's worth has nothing to do with their tax bracket. I sat there until past midnight with 32 years of paper spread across my kitchen table, and the bakery downstairs started its ovens, and I made my decision. Monday morning, 8:55, I was outside First Meridian Bank in my work clothes because I had a 10:30 shift and I am never late. I slid the cloth ledger and the account book across the counter to a young teller and asked him to verify the current balance before I made some changes. He typed. He stopped. He leaned into his screen and his ears went red and the customer service voice fell right off him. "Ma'am, please don't go anywhere. I need to get the branch manager." The branch manager was a Mr. Whitaker, and Mr. Whitaker took one look at the screen and walked me personally back to a private office. And 4 minutes later, a woman named Mrs. Ostrander, who handled what the brass plate called private client services, was pouring me coffee I didn't ask for. "Mrs. Marsh," she said, "this account was opened in March 1991, deposits nearly every month for 33 years. With the compounding and the way you had it invested since the 90s, she turned the screen toward me gently, like it might startle me. "The balance is $6,240,000. I knew the number. I do my own arithmetic. But hearing it said out loud in that hushed little room made it a fact in the world instead of a fact in my head. "I want to restructure it," I said. "Today, if we can start the paperwork. It currently lists my son as beneficiary. I want it moved into an irrevocable trust. My attorney has the framework, with conditions I control. No one touches a dollar of it without my trustee's sign-off." If you're wondering why, that's fair. 2 days earlier, I'd have handed my boy all of it with both hands. But standing at that party, I had watched my son's wife look at a paid-off house and see garbage, and something in my gut, some alarm that 30 years of listening to people talk over a steam table had built into me, said, "Protect it first. Understand later." There would be no withdrawing piles of cash, no dramatics, just paper, moved quietly out of anyone's reach but mine. Mrs. Ostrander didn't blink. Women like her have seen everything. "We can begin today. Anything else?" 2 things. I'd like full statements for my review. And I'd rehearse this in the car. I need a recommendation. Someone who does discreet financial background work. A professional. She studied me for a moment, then wrote a name on the back of a business card. Cyrus Bell. 26 years with IRS criminal investigation before he went private. Tell him I sent you. I was 11 minutes late to my shift for the first time in 9 years. Yolanda, who works the line with me, raised her eyebrows. I tied my apron and said nothing. Cyrus Bell looked like a man you'd ask to recommend a fishing lure. 70, if he was a day. Flannel shirt, drugstore reading glasses, drinking decaf at a corner table at the Bluebird Diner like he had nowhere to be until Thursday. That's the whole trick of him, I'd learn. Nobody in the history of the world has ever lowered their voice around Cyrus Bell. I told him I wanted to understand my daughter-in-law's finances. Not gossip, documents. He quoted me a price I paid half up front in a cashier's check, and he said, "Give me a week." He called me in 6 days. Same diner, same booth, but this time there was a folder on the table, and he didn't touch his coffee. "Your daughter-in-law is a senior loan officer at Keystone Summit Lending," he said. "Salary, base plus commission, maybe 140 in a good year. Now look at the spending." He fanned out statements like a card trick. The lease on the German SUV, the club membership, a handbag that cost more than I pay my roofers for a full tear-off. She's running a lifestyle north of 300 a year. So I asked the obvious question, where's the rest coming from? He laid down the next set of papers slowly, one at a time, the way you set down weight. For about 2 years, she's been steering mortgage approvals using inflated appraisals. There's an appraiser she works with, same name keeps showing up, who values properties 20–30% over market. Loans get approved that never should be. And there's a consulting LLC, registered to a P.O. box, that receives a fee every time one of those loans closes. He looked at me over the glasses. The LLC is hers. 2 steps removed, but hers. Best I can document. She's pulled in around $290,000 in kickbacks. That's bank fraud and wire fraud, Mrs. Marsh. Federal. The diner went on around us. Somebody's milkshake machine. Somebody's birthday. A little cluster of waitresses singing. I sat there and felt something cold and old settle into place. Because the truth is, I wasn't shocked. I had watched that woman perform generosity, perform affection, perform laughter at a one-year-old's party. People who perform everything are usually hiding something. My son, I said, is he in it? That's the part you need to hear carefully. Cyrus pulled out 2 pages. His name appears on the LLC's bank paperwork as a cosigner. My stomach dropped through the floor and he held up a hand. Look at the signature. Now look at his real signature. I pulled his DMV records and your mortgage cosign from years back. It's traced. Decent trace, but traced. The IP records on the account creation come back to her office. He's never logged in, never moved a dime, and on 2 of the dates he signed, your son was out of state. I verified the travel. He tapped the page. She forged him onto it. If this ever unravels, she's built him in as the fall guy. I have been angry in my life. I have never been angry like that. Not for me. For me, I'd had 30 years of practice being underestimated. This was my child. She had thrown my gift in the trash, and underneath the tent and the harpist, she had been quietly fitting my son for handcuffs meant for her. What do you want to do? Cyrus asked. I looked out the window for a long minute. I could tell my son, and I knew the way you know your own child's face, exactly how that would go. She'd cry. She'd call me a bitter old woman who never accepted her. And my boy, my conflict-allergic boy, who laughed at the grass while his wife mocked me, would choose peace over truth, the way he'd been choosing it for 4 years. I'd lose him, and she'd have time to clean house. Or I could let the truth arrive wearing a badge. I want certified copies of everything, I said, especially the forgeries and the travel records, everything that proves my son's hands are clean. Cyrus nodded slowly. You're going to make a phone call. I'm going to make a phone call. I didn't do it from home. Call me paranoid. I call it careful. I drove to the public library downtown, the one with the computers anyone can use, and I spent 40 minutes on the FBI's tip portal with Cyrus's documentation scanned to a thumb drive. Inflated appraisals, the complicit appraiser, the Shell LLC and its kickback ledger, and a separate, clearly labeled file, evidence of the forged signatures and proof of my son's whereabouts, with a note that said, in plain words, this man is being framed by his wife and does not know it. My finger sat over the submit button for a long time. I thought about the families in those loan files, young couples who'd been approved for mortgages on houses worth less than their debt, people who'd trusted a smiling professional and would be underwater for a decade, people like my tenants, people like me once. This was never revenge. I want you to understand that, whatever else you decide about me, this was a woman removing her child from the path of a train. I pressed submit. The screen gave me a reference number. I wrote it on the back of a grocery receipt, cleared the browser, and walked out into the afternoon like any other gray-haired lady leaving the library. Then came the longest 2 weeks of my life and the phone calls. My son called the Tuesday after the party. Light voice. Too light. Mom, hey, about Saturday. She feels terrible. It came out wrong. I let it go to voicemail. He called Thursday. Mom, come on. Call me back. Voicemail. The next week, the lightness was gone. Mom, something weird is going on. 2 of her loan files got pulled for some compliance review, and she's not sleeping. She snapped at me over nothing. I could use. I don't know. Call me? Then, days later, 11:40 at night, a voice I hadn't heard since he was 8 years old and woke up from nightmares. Mom, please. I don't know what's happening. Please call me back. I sat on my bed with the phone against my chest, and I let myself cry for exactly the length of that voicemail and not 1 second longer. Then I put the phone on the charger and went to sleep, because the kindest thing I could do for my son was not comfort. It was timing. The federal woman called me 9 days after my submission. They'd unsealed my contact information at my own request. That was always the plan. Agent Lucinda Pope, financial crimes. Flat, careful voice. They had been circling Keystone Summit for months on a different file, she said. My packet had connected pipes. They hadn't connected. The forgery evidence had been forwarded to their document examiner, who concurred. We'll be moving within a couple of weeks, she said. You'll hear about it on the news. I'd like to ask you something irregular, I said, and I felt her brace. When you execute the arrest, there's a Saturday, 2 weeks out. The family will be gathered at a property called the Wexford Inn at 2 p.m. I can guarantee she'll be there. Ma'am, we don't schedule arrests for family theater. I'm not asking for theater. I'm asking that, when it happens, my son hears it from someone with credentials, in daylight, with me standing next to him, instead of from a battering ram at 6 in the morning while he's holding a baby. I let that sit, Agent Pope. I've given you proof he's a victim in this. He's about to lose his whole understanding of his life. Let him lose it standing up. Long silence. Papers. How do you guarantee she'll be there? Because, I said, I own the property, and I'm about to do something she will not be able to stay away from. Here's what I did. That week, Gus Ferraro, at my instruction, sent formal notice to my daughter-in-law that the Wexford Inn was canceling all future private bookings, including the standing reservations she'd made for the anniversary gala and the christening. Reason given, the property was ceasing event operations permanently. And then we announced it publicly. The Wexford Inn would be converted, pending permits, into a culinary training center and community, teaching kitchen, free job training for single parents, scholarships for food service workers. The carriage house, which needed the least work, would open as the first teaching kitchen. The main building would follow in about 18 months, because real construction takes real time, and I have never once in my life pretended otherwise. The local paper ran it on page 2. New owner of historic Wexford Inn revealed as area cafeteria cook. Longtime landlord plans culinary nonprofit. There was a photograph of me and my whites standing at the steam table at St. Lee. Ambrose, because I told the reporter that's who built it and that's who they'd photograph. My phone started ringing at 7,004 the morning the story ran, and it did not stop. My son drove straight to the inn that afternoon and found me on the terrace with the salvage crew. The chandeliers already crated, the tent poles gone, the great dining room stripped to bare plaster and tarps. He came across that lawn in yesterday's shirt, unshaved, holding the folded newspaper like it might bite him. Mom. His voice cracked on the one syllable. You own this place? Since 2018. You. He turned in a circle, taking in the bare windows, the crated fixtures. We had his birthday here. She booked it for 2 years out. You stood right there and they. He stopped. I watched him reach the edge of it and look over. You stood there while they laughed at you. On your own property. Yes. Why'd in here? Say anything. Because I needed to see what you do, I said. And I was not gentle because the time for gentle was past. And what you did was laugh at the grass, son. He sat down right there on the terrace steps like his strings were cut, and he put his head in his hands and he said, The newspaper says 31 properties. It says, Mom, the cafeteria, the apartment over the bakery. I offered you $40 for groceries at Christmas. His shoulders were shaking. Why did you live like that? Because the work was honest and the work was mine, I said. And because I wanted you to grow up knowing a person's value before you ever saw their balance. I got half of it right. I sat down next to him on the cold stone. I got the other half wrong, and I'll carry that. I should have told you years ago. Secrets always send a bill. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and went gray. It's her. Mom, something's wrong at her work. There are auditors. She says her lawyer. He looked up at me, and I watched the question form behind his eyes, the one he was too afraid to ask. Saturday, I said, 2 o'clock. Both of you, here. There are things you have to see with your own eyes, from people whose word you can't argue with. Until then, I need you to do exactly one thing for me. I took his hand, the way I did when he was small and we crossed busy streets. Do not sign anything. Not a tax form, not a bank slip, not a birthday card she hands you, nothing. Promise me. He stared at me. Mom, you're scaring me? Good, I said. Scared means you're finally looking. Saturday came in sharp and blue. At 1:40, I stood alone in the stripped dining room of the Wexford Inn, bare plaster, drop cloths, dust turning slowly in the light from the tall windows, the room where a harpist had played 3 weeks before. At 1:52, my son's car. At 1:57, hers, the German SUV, with her mother in the passenger seat, because of course her mother came. That woman would attend the opening of an envelope if she thought there was status in it. My daughter-in-law walked in performing irritation, heels clicking on the bare subfloor. Okay, we're here. What is this? Some kind of intervention? Because if this is about that party, I have apologized. You haven't actually, I said. But that's not why you're here. Then why? Tires on gravel, 2 sedans, doors. I watched it happen in her face before anyone said a word, watched her look out those tall windows at the people getting out of those playing cars, and watched 2 years of arithmetic complete itself behind her eyes. Her mother said, "Who on earth?" And my daughter-in-law said nothing at all, because she already knew, and that, more than anything, told my son everything. If you were standing in my shoes right now, be honest with me. Drop a comment, 1 word, justice. If you'd have done the same, too far if you think I went past the line. I genuinely read them, and this is the part where I most want to know where you stand. Because what got said in that bare room over the next 4 minutes is something I'll hear for the rest of my life. Agent Pope came in with her credentials already out, a second agent behind her. "Ma'am, I'm with the FBI. You're under arrest for bank fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft." This is insane. My daughter-in-law's voice went up and to the side, reaching for my son. Babe, tell them. This is your mother. She's doing this. She has hated me from day one." Mrs. Marsh provided documentation, Agent Pope said evenly, in an ongoing federal investigation that predates her involvement. The appraisal scheme, the consulting LLC, the kickback ledger, and then, turning slightly, so it landed square on my son, and the account paperwork bearing this man's forged signature. The room went so quiet I could hear the drop cloths breeze. "Forged," my son said, not a question, a door opening. Our examiner confirmed it. "On 2 signature dates, you were verifiably out of state." Agent Pope's voice gentled by 1 degree. "You were set up as a co-signer on the shell company, sir. If this had surfaced on its own, you'd have been the first one we looked at." My son turned to his wife, and I will never forget his face. Not rage, worse than rage, the face of a man watching his own house from the outside for the first time. "You put my name on it." It was insurance. It was nothing. It was never going to. And then she broke, and what came out of her was the truth, the way truth always comes out of people like her, ugly and aimed at me. Do you know what it's like? Building a life with people watching to see if you'll slip? Your mother in her little hairnet, acting like scrubbing pans is some kind of nobility. I needed the numbers to work, and your name was clean. And honestly, I assumed that sad little account of hers had something in it we could fall back on. "You assumed," my son said quietly. "She offered us a paid-off house, and you threw it in the trash, and the whole time you were keeping my name in your pocket like a getaway car." The cuffs sounded exactly like you think they do. Small, final. Her mother followed the agents out without 1 word to anyone, heels catching on the subfloor, and I noticed she was careful to walk several steps behind her daughter, already practicing the distance. My son didn't cry until the cars were gone. Then he sat down on a paint bucket in the middle of that gutted room and sobbed like the 8-year-old with the nightmares. And this time I did go to him, and I held the back of his head, and neither of us said anything for a long while. "You knew before the party?" he said finally into my shoulder. "The trust, the investigator. You knew weeks ago." "I suspected at the party. I knew 6 days after." "Why didn't you just tell me?" I took his face in my two hands, these hands, 50 years of steam burns and knife scars. Would you have believed me? He held my eyes as long as he could. Then he looked at the floor. And that was the only answer either of us needed. You're protected, I told him. Every document proving you never touched it is in federal hands and in my attorney's safe. You will walk out of this with your name clean, because I made sure of it before I made a single other move. That part was never in question. I pushed the hair off his forehead. That's the job, son. It's been the job since 1990. He laughed, a wet, broken, real laugh. The newspaper said 27 million. The newspaper undercounted. And the account, the one from the ledger, in trust for you and for that baby, when you're ready. He started to ask, and I shook my head. Not ready like a date on a calendar, ready like Monday morning, 7 a.m. This property, work boots. The carriage house won't renovate itself, and Gus needs a project man he can shout at. He looked around the bare room, the crated chandeliers, the tarps, the bones of the place where his wife had thrown my life in the trash. I have a job, Mom. You have a salary, I said. I'm offering you a foundation. They're different things, and it took me 30 years to learn it, and I'm offering you the short course. Monday morning, 7 a.m., he was there, boots and all. 6 months now. The divorce is grinding along. The federal case is moving the way federal cases move, slowly and then all at once. Her lawyer is talking about a plea. The carriage house kitchen opened the first week of October. 8 burners, 2 convection ovens, 16 students in the first cohort, a hospital housekeeper, 2 single dads, a young line cook named Bree who reminds me so much of myself at 29 that I have to leave the room sometimes. The main building is studs and promise, 18 months out, right on the schedule I set, because I do not believe in miracles in construction, only in contractors who return phone calls. My son hasn't taken a paycheck since he started. I know because Gus sends me reports and because my boy told me himself, standing in the carriage house with drywall dust in his hair, I'm not trying to earn the money back, Mom. I'm trying to earn back something else. He brings the baby on Saturdays. My grandson takes his naps in a playpen in the office where the booking desk used to be, on 6 acres that will outlive all of us. And he will grow up thinking a teaching kitchen is the most normal inheritance in the world. Last month, my son asked me, quietly, over coffee, whether I'd forgiven him. I told him the truth. I told him he'd earned something I rank higher, which is my respect, and that forgiveness was already his the day he put the boots on, because forgiveness was never the wage. Showing up was. I still work the breakfast shift at St. Ambrose 3 days a week. People ask why, now that the whole county knows. I tell them 400 patients still need to eat, and I still make the best chicken and dumplings in the building. And there is not one thing on this earth undignified about either fact. The envelope hangs on my kitchen wall now, in a cheap frame from the drugstore. The deed's been re-recorded. The Cobb Avenue house belongs to Bree and her little girl as of last week, on a mortgage I hold at a rate that would make a banker cry. But the envelope itself, with the faint buttercream stain still on the corner, that I kept. Because my daughter-in-law was right about one thing, it was just old papers and a key. Paper and brass, worth nothing. The value was never in the object. It was in the 33 years behind it, and she couldn't see 33 years of anything because people like her only know how to read price tags. I'm not going to stand here at the end and tell you I was right about everything because I wasn't. I hid the truth from my own child for 3 decades and called it a lesson, and that silence nearly cost me everything. It handed a stranger 4 years to wrap herself around my son's life, and it taught him to be embarrassed of a woman he should have been studying. So hear me on this. Don't do what I did. Don't test the people you love. Don't wait for a betrayal to do the telling. Sit them down at the kitchen table and show them the ledger while there's still time for it to be a conversation instead of a reckoning. I believe God was watching over those 33 years. I believe He gave me work as a purpose and not a punishment. And I believe He let that envelope land in the trash so that everything hidden could finally come into the light, because some lessons only grow in broken ground. But I also believe he'd have settled for me just being honest a whole lot sooner. If this story landed somewhere true for you, if you've ever been measured by your uniform or watched money turn someone you love into someone you don't recognize, tell me about it in the comments, because stories like these, family stories, real-life drama that ends in something better than bitterness, they only matter if we're honest with each other in the telling. Share this one with somebody who mops floors or hauls trays or drives a bus and wonders if anyone sees them. Somebody sees them. And subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine from people my age who learned the hard way what's spare change and what isn't. Thank you for staying with me to the end of it. My grandson turns 2 in the spring. The parties at the carriage house, paper streamers, sheet cake, my dumplings. Everyone's invited who works for a living. And the gift will be small and plain and worth more than anything under that tent ever was. I keep that envelope on my kitchen wall, buttercream stain and all, and some mornings I stand there with my coffee and just look at it. Not because it hurts anymore, because it explains everything, if you read it right. Nothing in this story happened by accident. Every ending grew straight out of a choice somebody planted years before. My daughter-in-law didn't fall the day Agent Pope walked in with the handcuffs. She fell 2 years earlier. The first time she inflated a number and told herself it was nothing, that everybody does it, that no one would look. Every shortcut after that was just the first one wearing a new outfit. By the time she put my son's forged name on that paperwork, she wasn't making a decision anymore. She was harvesting one. That's how it works. You don't get caught for what you did last week. You get caught for who you decided to become a long time ago. And the same law worked for me, just facing the other direction. 33 years of deposits in a cloth ledger, $40 at a time, didn't feel like power while I was doing it. It felt like Tuesday. But honest work compounds the same way crooked money does. Quieter, slower, and a whole lot sturdier. When the storm finally came, I wasn't lucky. I was prepared, because I had spent 3 decades being the kind of person who would be. If you take anything from an old cafeteria cook, take this. 3 things saved my son, and not one of them was money. The first was plain decency. The stubborn refusal to lie even when lying pays, because a clean name turned out to be the only thing in that family the FBI couldn't question. The second was judgment. I didn't act on my anger at that party. I went home, sat with the papers, and thought. I hired Cyrus before I made one move. Feelings make terrible architects. Patience and a clear head drew the blueprints that anger never could have. And the third was grit, the unglamorous, get-up-anyway kind. The kind that learns plumbing from library books. The kind that lets 17 phone calls go to voicemail when answering would feel so much better, because the timing matters more than the comfort. The kind my son finally found at 7 in the morning with work boots on. Build those 3 things, and you don't have to fear anyone's opinion of your uniform. Skip them, and no salary, no venue, no handbag will save you, because you'll be standing on borrowed ground, and borrowed ground always gets called in. I got things wrong too. My silence was its own crooked seed, and it nearly cost me my boy. So I'll say it plain. Be honest early, think before you swing, and outlast the people who laugh at you. They're sprinting. You're building. And in my experience, the building always outlives the sprint. It was never spare change. It was never even money. It was 33 years of becoming someone. And that's the one inheritance nobody can throw in the trash.